They said he was born to inherit an empire. But from the moment Crown Prince Rudolf of Austria took his first breath, he was already living in the shadow of a world that refused to change. It was the late 1800s and the Habsburg Empire stretched across Europe, grand, ancient, powerful, and rotting from within. While the rest of the world moved toward modern science, democracy, and progress, Vienna's court clung to the old order like a dying god. And at its heart stood Emperor Franz Joseph, stern, cold, unbending, a man who ruled as if time itself obeyed him. But his only son Rudolf did not believe in obedience. He believed in tomorrow. As a child, Rudolf devoured books on astronomy, politics, evolution, things no crown prince was supposed to read. He asked questions the empire didn't want answered. He believed that the world could change, that people could rule themselves, that science could free men from superstition. And every time he spoke of progress, his father's face hardened like marble. The emperor wanted a soldier. The son became a philosopher. He was taught to shoot, to march, to salute, but what he loved were ideas, not weapons. He studied Charles Darwin in secret. He invited professors and poets to his private chambers to speak about revolutions that had shaken other nations. And in the silence of those candlelit rooms, he began to dream of a new Austria, freer, wiser, and unafraid of time. They called him the most intelligent prince in Europe. But intelligence was a curse in a palace built on obedience. The imperial court began to whisper that the prince was dangerous, that he questioned the church, the army, and even the emperor himself. Every time Rudolf spoke of reform, of giving power to the people, his father heard treason. The distance between them grew like a crack in marble. One ruled the empire as it had always been. The other looked at the clock and saw that the future was already coming. By the time Rudolf was 20, he had learned to hide behind smiles and silence. He played the role of dutiful son while quietly building connections with writers, scientists, and liberals, the thinkers who dreamed of a modern empire. He drank with journalists, debated with philosophers, and wrote essays under secret names. And the more he learned, the more he saw how fragile the throne truly was. At court, he was surrounded by mirrors and masks, courtiers who bowed low but whispered poison behind his back. They called him melancholic, unstable, unfit to rule. But behind those pale blue eyes burned a mind too fast for its own age. And then, there was love. Baroness Mary Vetsera was only 17 when she met the prince, beautiful, innocent, and dangerously romantic. She saw not a crown but a man trapped between two worlds. Rudolf saw in her a mirror of his own restlessness, someone too alive for a world made of rules. They met in secret. Letters passed like sparks through the cold corridors of the palace. She called him her beloved angel. He called her his soul of fire. But behind their passion was despair. Rudolf was married to Princess Stephanie of Belgium, a woman he no longer loved, and the empire he was born to inherit was crumbling under its own weight. Every idea he proposed, disarmament, reform, education, was crushed by his father's command, no. By the winter of 1888, the prince was exhausted. He drank heavily, suffered migraines, and spoke often of death. He told friends that he was chained to a corpse, the corpse of the empire. And yet, even in his darkness, he spoke of one impossible dream, stopping time. He wanted to freeze the world before it collapsed. To hold on to beauty, to youth, to love, to one moment untouched by the decay of the empire. It was not just the dream of a man, it was the rebellion of a soul who refused to watch history devour him. And so, one winter evening in January 1889, Crown Prince Rudolf invited Mary Vetsera to his hunting lodge at Mayerling. It was a place of silence, surrounded by forests that swallowed the sound of horses and wind. He told the servants not to disturb him. He told his friends he wanted peace. He told his lover they would be together forever. What happened next would shake the empire to its foundations. By morning, the Crown Prince of Austria would be dead, and the empire he tried to save would begin to die with him. The road to Mayerling was covered in frost that night. The air hung heavy with silence, the kind of silence that feels like it knows a secret. Inside the carriage, Crown Prince Rudolf sat beside Baroness Mary Vetsera, her gloved hand resting lightly on his. The horses moved slowly through the darkness. Neither spoke much. There was nothing left to say. For weeks, Rudolf had been writing letters. Some to his friends, some to his mother, and one to Mary herself. They were not love letters. They were farewells. In one he wrote, "I am tired of living. The world is not made for me." In another he said, "We will meet again in a better land where there is no time." When they arrived at the hunting lodge, the servants lit the lamps and prepared dinner. The prince looked calm, almost relieved. He smiled at Mary, asked for champagne, and spoke softly to the staff. He told them not to wake him in the morning. That night he walked through the halls of Mayerling alone. The portraits of dead Habsburg ancestors stared down at him like silent judges. He stopped before one, the face of Emperor Maximilian of Mexico, his uncle who had also died by gunfire. Rudolf whispered to the painting, "You were too modern for your world too." Then he turned away. The night grew colder. The fire burned low. Behind the locked doors of the bedroom, the two lovers sat close together. Outside, snow drifted past the windows like falling ash. Somewhere beyond the trees, the empire slept, its heir hidden away, its fate about to be rewritten. The servants heard voices, low, trembling, intimate. Then a single sharp sound like a chair falling. And then, nothing. When they knocked in the morning, no one answered. The door was locked from the inside. After hours of waiting, the valet forced it open. Inside, the air was still and cold. On the bed lay Mary Vetsera, lifeless. On the floor nearby, the Crown Prince of Austria lay dead, a pistol beside him. The empire's heir was gone. Panic filled the corridors. One servant fainted. Another fled into the snow. No one knew what to do. The emperor was informed by telegram. His first words were not of sorrow but command. "Seal the lodge. Say nothing. The honor of the crown must be preserved." The official report said it was a suicide pact, that the prince had taken his life out of despair and love. But whispers began almost immediately. Some claimed Rudolf had been planning to overthrow his father. Others said he had met with Hungarian reformers who promised him a new crown if he broke away from Vienna. A few whispered that the prince had discovered state secrets, something so dangerous that the only solution was silence. The emperor ordered the body moved secretly to Vienna. The church refused to grant him a proper burial, calling suicide a sin. So the emperor declared it an accident, a sudden collapse of the heart. The truth was locked away with the reports, sealed for eternity. Mary's body was taken separately, smuggled out of Mayerling by night. Her family was told to bury her quietly, far from the city. No mourning clothes, no ceremonies, no mention of her name. The woman who had loved a prince was erased from history in a single day. 4 days the empire moved like a shadow. Vienna's bells tolled softly, and the people wept without knowing why. No one was allowed to speak of the details. The newspapers printed only what the palace dictated. His Imperial and Royal Highness passed peacefully in his sleep. But those who had seen the bodies knew better. They spoke of 2 bullets. They spoke of fear in her eyes. They spoke of something far darker than love. And so, Mayerling became a wound the empire never healed. A locked room filled with ghosts, a mystery whispered across generations. Years later, those who had known him said Rudolf had often spoken of time, as if it were a living enemy. He once told a friend, "My father believes he can stop time by freezing it. I will stop it by leaving it." The man who could not change his world decided to leave it behind. But in doing so he changed everything. The death of Crown Prince Rudolf was not just a tragedy, it was the beginning of the end. The empire that had lasted for centuries began to crack from within. And the Habsburg dynasty, so proud, so eternal, had just lost its future. The news of the Crown Prince's death spread through Vienna like a winter storm. People whispered in the streets, newspapers were confiscated, and the royal palace became a fortress of silence. The emperor appeared before his ministers pale and aged, as though he had lost not just a son, but the reflection of his own youth. He did not cry in public. He spoke only once, "My son is dead. The crown remains." But the crown no longer felt eternal. Something inside the empire had broken. The people loved Rudolf more than they ever loved his father. He had spoken to them not as subjects but as human beings. He had visited hospitals, written essays about poverty, and argued that science and progress could make Austria a beacon of hope. He had wanted to open the windows of the empire and let the future in. And now those windows were sealed shut again. The emperor ordered the lodge at Mayerling to be torn apart. Every trace of that night was to be erased. The bed was burned, the walls were repainted, and the rooms were transformed into a chapel, so that no one would ever again speak of what had truly happened there. But no chapel could sanctify the silence. In the shadows of Europe, conspiracy bloomed. Some said the prince had been assassinated for plotting with Hungarian nationalists. Others believed he had known too much, perhaps about the secret dealings of the crown, or the decaying alliances that held the empire together. There were even whispers that foreign powers had a hand in it. But the truth died with him, locked forever behind that door in Mayerling. As the years passed, the emperor withdrew further into ritual and prayer. He ruled for decades after his son's death, but he was never the same. His empire became a museum of old ideas, its marble halls echoing with ghosts of reform that never came. The people called him, the man who outlived his own world. And what of Mary Vetsera? Her name was forbidden, her letters destroyed. For nearly a century no one spoke of her. But time, the very thing Rudolf tried to stop, refused to obey the crown. In 1926, her grave was disturbed by thieves searching for jewelry. Among the ruins they found bones, hair and fragments of clothing, proof that she had once been real, that she had existed beyond the scandal. Later, a bundle of her letters resurfaced, written in her delicate hand, "I love you endlessly. We go to our death together." Even in death, her words still trembled with youth. By then the world had changed. The Great War had come and gone. The Habsburg Empire had fallen. The throne Rudolf was meant to inherit no longer existed. Vienna was no longer the capital of an empire, it was a memory wrapped in fog. Historians still argue about that night. Some say Rudolf's despair came from politics, others from madness or forbidden love. But perhaps it was something deeper. Perhaps he could see what no one else could, that the world of kings and crowns was dying and nothing could stop it. He had been born to inherit an empire, yet he lived as a man out of time. Every invention, every idea, every spark of modern thought that he embraced was a rebellion against the ancient world that had created him. And when that world refused to change, he chose to leave it behind. In his final hours, he believed he could stop time, just for one night, one moment, one breath between love and eternity. But time, cruel and patient, only watched. Decades later, when historians looked back at the ruins of the Habsburgs, they said it began with Mayerling. That was the first crack in the marble. The prince's death was not just a scandal, it was a prophecy. The empire that could not change would not survive. And so, the story of Crown Prince Rudolf remains more than just tragedy. It is a warning. Every throne, no matter how golden, stands upon the fragile faith of time. And those who try to stop it, whether through power, love, or despair, always discover the same truth. Time cannot be stopped. It only remembers,